My daughter-in-law said she didn't want this useless old woman in her house anymore. Those words, child, they cut sharper than any knife. I wasn't meant to hear them, but my ears have lived through a lifetime of whispers. I was standing just beyond the kitchen door, the shadows covering me, when she said it. She spoke with such coldness, her voice flat and sharp like glass breaking. Your father, my son, stood there too. He didn't defend me. He didn't argue. He only lowered his head, his silence heavier than her cruelty. That silence was worse than her words. I pressed my hand against the wooden frame of the doorway, so tight the splinters buried into my skin, just to keep myself from stumbling. I couldn't let them hear me gasp. I couldn't let them know I was standing there, hearing my own worth reduced to nothing. Useless old woman. Do you know what I saw when I looked down at my hands that night? I saw the cracks, the scars, the thin blue veins like faded rivers. But I also saw everything those hands had built. These hands scrubbed the very floors my daughter-in-law stood upon. These hands carried buckets of water in the bitter cold until my knuckles bled. They sewed torn shirts by candlelight so my boy could look neat at school. They starved, sometimes, so he would not. And yet, in their eyes, those hands had become nothing more than a burden. I went back to my room quietly, like a shadow that no one noticed. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body heavy, my breath trembling. On the nightstand was your grandfather's photograph. I reached out, touched the glass with my fingertips, and whispered to him, "Do you see what has become of me?" His smile, frozen in that picture, seemed both comforting and unbearable. That night I could not sleep. The walls of the house I had worked to build felt colder than winter. I listened to their voices in the living room, their laughter rising and falling. Not once did they call my name. Not once did they ask if I was hungry, or cold, or even alive. My plate at dinner had been smaller, pushed aside as though my stomach no longer mattered. My chair was farther from the table. Even my presence had become too heavy for them. I turned on my side, my eyes burning from tears, and I thought of leaving. Truly, I did. I thought of gathering my few clothes, tying them in a bundle, and walking out into the night with no destination, no family, nothing but the sound of my own footsteps. I thought of letting the wind decide where my old body should rest. But something inside me, call it stubbornness, call it pride, call it survival, told me to wait. To endure. To listen. You see, child, I've lived long enough to know that storms always bring change. Sometimes destruction, sometimes renewal. And I felt, deep in my bones, that a storm was coming. So I lay there, my ears sharp even through the weight of my sorrow. I whispered into the darkness, "Is this all my life has become? After every sacrifice, am I just an old woman in the way?" The silence answered me. The silence pressed on my chest until I could hardly breathe. And then, just as dawn crept through the curtains, painting the walls in pale grey light, it happened. A knock. Not gentle. Not polite. Not the knock of a neighbor asking for sugar or a child playing games. No, this was different. Firm. Certain. It rattled the doorframe, cut through the air, and made the house still. I froze, clutching my shawl tighter around me. My heart pounded like a drum in my fragile chest. I shuffled toward the door, every step heavy, and with each one I whispered to myself, "This is it. Something is about to change." The laughter in the living room faded. My son's footsteps slowed. Even she, your mother, went quiet. And me. I placed my hand on the door, my fingers trembling, and I thought, that knock is not just a knock. That is fate. Child, that morning, when I opened the door, nothing in our lives was ever the same again. Child, before I tell you what happened after that knock, you need to know why my heart carried both fear and strength that morning. You need to know where I came from. Because every wrinkle on my face, every scar on these tired hands, carries a story. And those stories matter. I was not always this frail woman sitting by your side. Once, I was young like your mother, with dark hair that danced in the wind, with dreams too big for the little town I was born into. But life has a way of teaching you that dreams don't always matter when survival is at stake. I married your grandfather when I was barely more than a girl. He was kind, with eyes that carried warmth even in the harshest winter. We had very little, just a one-room house with a stove that smoked more than it cooked, and fields that gave more weeds than wheat. But what we lacked in money, we tried to make up for with love. And yet, child, love doesn't keep the hunger away. Love doesn't fill a bowl when the cupboard is empty. I remember nights when your grandfather and I sat on the porch, the stars looking down at us, and we shared one piece of bread between us, pretending we were already full. He would smile at me and say, "Tomorrow will be better." I believed him because I had to. Then came the war. The men were cold, and your grandfather was among them. I still remember the day he left. He wore his old coat, patched at the elbows, and his boots were worn thin, but he stood tall, holding my hand tightly before stepping onto that train. "Take care of our boy," he whispered. "Take care of yourself." I promised him I would. But promises, child, are heavy things. While he was gone, the world fell apart around me. There were shortages, bread lines that stretched down the street, water we had to carry from miles away. I carried your father, then just a baby, on my back as I walked those endless miles. My shoes split open, the cold cutting through the soles, but I walked. Because a mother walks, even when her body says she cannot. There were days I had no food for myself. I boiled wild roots, stretched thin soups, prayed the baby would not cry too loud from hunger. At night, I rocked him in my arms, whispering lullabies through tears. And when he finally slept, I sat there in the dark and begged God for strength to live one more day. Your grandfather did not return. Not in the way I hoped. Months later, a letter came, sealed with an official stamp. My hands shook as I opened it, my eyes burning as I read the words no wife wants to read. He had fallen, fighting far from home, his body left in soil I would never touch. I pressed the letter to my chest and screamed into the emptiness, a sound so raw it frightened even me. But grief does not feed a child. So I dried my tears and walked. I took in laundry from wealthier families, scrubbing until my knuckles bled. I cleaned floors that others dirtied, cooked meals I could never taste, mended clothes I could never wear. Sometimes they paid me in coins, sometimes in scraps of food. I never complained. I never asked for more. Because each small payment was another day my boy could eat. Do you know, child, what it feels like to starve in silence so your child won't notice? I would place the bread in front of him, smiling as if I wasn't hungry, saying, "I ate earlier." But my stomach twisted in knots, and my hands shook from weakness. That's the kind of sacrifice mothers make. The kind nobody claps for. The kind nobody remembers until, perhaps, moments like this, when I tell you. As the years passed, I grew older, but my son grew stronger. He became the man of the house before he was even a teenager. He worked odd jobs, carried wood, fetched water, did anything he could to ease the burden. And still, I worried for him every moment. I wanted him to study, to have the education I never had, but money was always thin. So I worked harder, even when my body begged me to stop. Your father grew into a man I was proud of. I thought, after all the hunger, after all the loss, perhaps life would finally give me peace. Perhaps my sacrifices had not been in vain. But then, a child, life is strange. It can give with one hand and take with the other. The same boy I carried on my back, the same boy I stabbed myself for, grew into a man who, in his own silence, let his wife call me useless. And that, I suppose, is the bitter truth of sacrifice. Not all who receive it understand its cost. So when that knock came the next morning, it was not just a knock to me. It was the sound of all my years of struggle meeting the moment of truth. I felt every mile I had walked, every tear I had shed, every wound I had carried, rushing back to me in that single echo. The door was about to open, child. And with it, so was the next chapter of our lives. Child, I can still hear that knock as if it happened yesterday. Firm. Uncertain. Not angry, but not gentle either. Just a sound that froze me in my chair, my hands trembling over the wooden arms. My daughter-in-law had told me the night before that she didn't want this useless old woman in her house anymore. And now, here was someone at my door at dawn. I thought for a moment it was the man from the home, come to take me away like an unwanted parcel. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked to the door, each step heavier than the last. I opened it slowly, bracing myself for shame. But it wasn't strangers. It was Mr. Harris, the landlord. He stood tall, his hat in his hands, his eyes kind but serious. Behind him stood my son, your father, shifting nervously. I could see the guilt written all over his face. He could not meet my eyes. "Morning, Mom," Mr. Harris said. "I need to clear something up with you." I tightened my shawl around my shoulders. My voice quivered. "If this is about me being a burden, you can save your words. I already know what they think of me." He looked at me long and hard. Then he opened the folder he carried and pulled out a deed. "No, Mom," he said softly. "This is about your house." My knees almost gave way. My house. What could he mean? He continued, "Your son tried to sell it. But when I went through the records, I found your name on the deed. Not his. Yours. It's been yours since the day you bought it, paid in cash, all those years ago." I gasped. Memories flooded back, the endless hours of laundry, the raw skin on my hands, the nights of hunger, the pennies I saved in a jar. All of it, all those sacrifices, had gone into buying this house. My house. I turned to my son. His face burned red. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. My heart broke, not for me, but for him. For the man he had become. Mr. Harris put the papers in my hands. "This place belongs to you, Mrs. Thompson. No one can take it from you. Not now. Not ever." I stared at the papers, tears welling in my eyes. My house. My security. My proof that all those years of sacrifice had meant something. I wasn't useless. I wasn't unwanted. I was the roof over their heads. I looked at your father, child. And for the first time, he looked small before me. I saw not the man, but the boy I had once carried on my back, the boy who had eaten while I had gone hungry. My voice was steady when I said, "I gave you everything I had. My body, my strength, my dreams. And you let her call me useless." He whispered, "Mom, but the words tangled in his throat. I shook my head. "You don't need to explain. You just need to remember." The silence between us was heavy, but it was not empty. It was full of truth. Full of the weight of years. Later that night, I sat in this very chair, watching the fire flicker low, listening to the house creak around me. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not joy, not triumph, peace. Because I had not been erased. My life, my work, my sacrifices, they had a name. They had roots. They had walls that stood around me, protecting me. Your father and his wife still live in town, but they do not come often. That is their choice. I no longer beg for love where it is not freely given. What I have is mine, and what I give now, I give to you. My stories. My lessons. My truth. Child, I tell you this not to make you sad, but so that you will remember. Life will ask more of you than you think you can give. It will take from you, sometimes until you feel hollow. But if you keep walking, if you keep holding on, those steps will mean something. One day, the world will see what you carried, even if it takes a lifetime. You leaned your head against my shoulder that night, your small hand holding mine. The warmth of your touch filled the cracks inside me that years of betrayal had carved. And I thought, perhaps this was the reason I survived all of it. Not for deeds or houses. Not for recognition. But for this moment. For you. Remember, child. Never call anyone useless. Every wrinkle hides a war. Every scar tells a story. And sometimes, the quietest people in the room have carried the heaviest loads. That's the truth of my life. They tried to put me away, but I fought back. Not with fists, not with anger, but with the truth I carried inside me. The truth of who I am. And now, as I sit here with you, I am not useless. I am not forgotten. I am your grandmother. And that is enough.